There was a time when Singaporeans laughed at Malaysia. Traffic jams, corruption, inefficiency, and a McDonald's that runs out of ice cream at 9 p.m. It was the favourite national sport of Singaporeans, mocking their northern neighbour while sipping $9 lattes under perfect air conditioning. But now, the joke's on them, because somehow the so-called perfect nation is starting to look worse than the country it used to pity. Yes, Singapore, the country that once called itself first world in a third world region, now feels like a sterile showroom where everything works, but nothing lives. Meanwhile, Malaysia, chaotic, loud, occasionally bribey Malaysia, suddenly looks human. Its people smile without calculating ROI. Its houses have space for families, not just robot vacuum cleaners. And most importantly, you can still buy food that tastes like life, not sterilized nutrition sold at Orchard Road prices. What happened? How did a country once marketed as Asia's miracle become a theme park of anxiety and control? How did its people, once envied for efficiency, become the most overworked, overmortgaged, and underloved citizens in the region? The truth is, Singapore didn't fall overnight. It rotted slowly, under the weight of its own perfection. When every corner had to be spotless, every citizen had to behave, and every dream had to be government approved. Meanwhile, Malaysia, with all its chaos, became what Singapore could never be again, authentically flawed. So today, let's dissect the unthinkable. When Singapore, the model Asian success story, quietly became the less desirable sibling, when the luxury prison started losing to the noisy neighbour, and when perfection finally proved unsustainable, stay until the end, because by the time we finish, you might realize Malaysia didn't get better, Singapore just got boring. Beautifully, expensively, tragically boring. Let's be honest. Singapore's greatest export isn't electronics, finance, or tourism, it's self-praise. Every brochure, every ad, every political speech, all saying the same thing. Singapore is safe, clean, efficient, and world-class. Yes, we get it. You have trees that never shed leaves, escalators that never break, and citizens that never talk back. But perfection, my dear viewers, is like Botox. Looks smooth at first, but over time, it stops your face from showing emotion. And Singapore, it's been over-injected. Walk through the streets of Kuala Lumpur, and you'll find chaos. Honking cars, people arguing, late nasi lemak deliveries, and cats running government meetings. But at least it feels alive. In Singapore, everything is so polished that even chaos must get government approval. Form 18B in triplicate. The Singaporean dream used to be admirable, rise from swamp to skyline, from kampung to condo. But now it's evolved into something else. A sterile loop of productivity, mortgage, and quiet suffering behind designer curtains. People work 60 hours a week, so they can afford 500 square feet of emotional emptiness, conveniently near an MRT station they're too tired to use on weekends. Meanwhile, Malaysia's so-called inefficiency has given its people something Singaporeans secretly envy: freedom. Freedom to breathe without a fine, freedom to complain without fear of being told to be grateful, freedom to live without KPIing your happiness. Singapore built a nation of order, but it forgot how to build a nation of humans. The irony: this obsession with perfection is now Singapore's biggest imperfection. It's not that the country doesn't work, it works too well, too predictably, too robotically, like an iPhone that never crashes, but also never surprises. Because what makes life worth living isn't control, it's contrast. And that's something Singapore deleted in the software update of its soul. Let's talk about something Singapore can't engineer: emotion. In Malaysia, people still smile for no reason. At the market, at the mamak stall, even while stuck in traffic for the 17th time that morning. Not because they're paid to, but because, brace yourself, they still have souls. Meanwhile, in Singapore, smiles have gone extinct. You only see them during National Day, in advertisements, or when a Grab driver finally finds parking on the first try. Otherwise, it's a nation of silent escalator zombies, efficient, polite, and utterly joyless. Why? Because when every moment of your life is optimized, you forget what spontaneity feels like. When you're told from birth which schools to enter, which industries to serve, and which condo to buy, happiness becomes another government project, carefully planned, beautifully packaged, but completely artificial. Malaysia, for all its flaws, the potholes, the politics, the price of onions, somehow preserved what Singapore lost: humanity. You can still joke with your boss without HR calling it unprofessional conduct. You can still negotiate with a street vendor without fear of a social credit deduction. And when things go wrong, because they always do, people shrug and say, "Tak apa." That phrase alone is the secret to national resilience. Singaporeans, on the other hand, would never survive a power outage longer than 15 minutes. They'd file a complaint, launch a petition, and demand a ministerial statement. Malaysians would just open the windows and talk to their neighbours, something Singaporeans now need a mental health app to remember how to do. You see, Malaysia's imperfection breeds community. Singapore's perfection breeds isolation. One creates laughter over shared suffering, the other creates silence over shared anxiety. In the end, Malaysia didn't suddenly become better, it just stayed human. Singapore, in its quest to eliminate inefficiency, accidentally eliminated emotion. And when a country forgets how to laugh, it doesn't matter how clean the streets are, it's already dirty inside. Singapore is rich, but have you noticed? The richer it gets, the poorer everyone feels. Every statistic screams success: GDP, reserves, property prices, world rankings, airport cleanliness. But the daily mood, a collective exhaustion disguised as discipline. Singaporeans don't live anymore, they perform. From school to office to retirement, life is one long audition for middle-class approval. You buy an overpriced condo to prove you've made it. Then you spend the next 30 years eating economic rice to keep paying for it. Meanwhile, Malaysia, yes, the land of chaos and corruption, somehow hosts a calmer society. Lower income, yes, but higher laughter per capita. Because happiness, unlike wealth, doesn't scale with GDP. It scales with permission to breathe. In Singapore, every breath feels taxable. You pay for the aircon that keeps you sane, for the car that proves your status, for the childcare that raises your KPI offspring. You even pay for the illusion that you're happy, in the form of endless brunches, therapy apps, and staycations that never quite cure the void. This is what perfection costs: your spontaneity, your curiosity, your emotional bandwidth. You get efficiency, but you lose depth. You get safety, but you lose texture. You get Marina Bay Sands, but you can't afford the drinks inside. And here's the cruel twist: once a nation markets itself as perfect, it can never afford to be real again. Singapore can't admit flaws, not publicly. Every criticism is labelled negative mindset, every complaint dismissed as ungrateful. It's like watching someone trapped in a designer cage, insisting they're free because the bars are gold. Wealth was supposed to liberate Singaporeans. Instead, it made them prisoners of expectation. The condo, the education, the CPF balance, all trophies in a marathon nobody enjoys running. And when the finish line finally arrives, the prize is more work. So yes, Singapore got rich. But in the process, it forgot how to feel rich. Because wealth is measured in comfort, but happiness is measured in chaos. And Malaysia, for all its mess, still remembers that. Singapore's greatest religion isn't Buddhism, Christianity, or Islam. It's control. From chewing gum bands to perfectly painted crosswalks, every corner of the island is designed for obedience. There's an unspoken national motto: if you can't regulate it, outlaw it. But after 50 years of perfection, something strange happened. Singaporeans became afraid of freedom. Give them an unplanned day and they panic. Ask them for an opinion, and they check if it's safe to say. Put them in a room without Wi-Fi, and they start to disintegrate like expired QR codes. Control was meant to protect people. Now it's turned them into self-policing citizens, anxious, hyper-aware, and allergic to risk. It's not a country anymore. It's a psychological experiment in learned compliance. Meanwhile, in Malaysia, people break rules like they breathe. Red light, suggestion, parking sign, decoration. Yet somehow the country survives. Because when you grow up in chaos, you learn adaptability, something the perfect nation quietly lost. Singaporeans call that chaos dangerous, but psychologists call it resilience. In Malaysia, if something breaks, people fix it with duct tape and optimism. In Singapore, if something breaks, there's a meeting, a report, a subcommittee, and still, nothing happens until someone gets approval from the top. Control builds safety, yes, but it also builds fragility, because when you over-engineer society, you remove its ability to bounce back. That's why Singaporeans crumble under small inconveniences, a train delay, a rude comment, a queue that's too long. These are not tragedies, yet they trigger existential meltdowns. The human spirit needs friction. It grows from error, laughter, and sometimes chaos. But Singapore engineered out every rough edge until all that's left is smooth predictability and chronic anxiety. Order became the new oppression. The price of safety was spontaneity. And the final irony? In trying so hard to avoid becoming like Malaysia, Singapore became something worse. A society terrified of life itself. Because when you fear disorder more than emptiness, you've already built your own cage. Every Singaporean who crosses the causeway secretly goes through a spiritual experience, though they'll never admit it. They roll their eyes at the traffic, at the chaos, at the endless stalls selling the same nasi lemak, but deep down, something feels different, lighter. That's because Malaysia, for all its dysfunction, still passes what I call the mirror test. When Malaysians look in the mirror, they see themselves. When Singaporeans look in the mirror, they see the system. Everything in Singapore is designed to reflect the nation's brand, not the individual. Your career, your education, even your apartment size is a reflection of policy success, not personal story. In Malaysia, the opposite is true. Your worth isn't measured by how perfectly you fit the system, it's how creatively you survive it. That's why Malaysia feels younger. It still makes mistakes. It still argues. It still experiments, sometimes brilliantly, sometimes stupidly, but always authentically. Singapore, in contrast, has aged like a rich but lonely bachelor. Perfect hair, perfect lighting, no friends. Everything runs on time, but nothing moves emotionally. Even joy has to pass through customs. Ask a Malaysian what freedom means, and they'll say, doing what you can with what you have. Ask a Singaporean, and they'll say, freedom? What's the Wi-Fi password? That's the tragedy of success. It sterilizes spontaneity. Malaysia, for all its flaws, still feels like a work in progress, and that's what keeps it alive. Singapore feels like a finished product, perfectly packaged, permanently sealed. And guess what? The world is starting to notice. Western journalists, YouTubers, digital nomads, they come to Singapore, take photos of the skyline, post 3 reels, and then escape to Penang. Because in Penang, they find culture without curation. In KL, they find humor without filters. And in Johor, they find something Singapore's billion-dollar brand can't buy: character. Singapore built perfection, Malaysia kept its personality. And in 2025, the world prefers the latter. Remember the 1990s? Back then, Singapore was the strict, successful older brother, polished shoes, straight A's, government scholarship. Malaysia was the messy younger sibling, always late, always broke, always dreaming big. Every family gathering ended the same: Singapore lecturing, Malaysia laughing. Fast forward to today, And guess who's aging better? Singapore's GDP is still bigger, but its spirit, shrinking. The people are exhausted, cynical, quietly depressed, living proof that order without imagination is just bureaucracy with Wi-Fi. Meanwhile, Malaysia, the supposedly chaotic one, has quietly evolved. Tech hubs in Penang, vibrant art scenes in KL, startup energy in Johor, and a new generation of bilingual, global-minded youth who think like creators, not administrators. Malaysia's advantage? It was never too perfect to change. Singapore, trapped by its own success, can't afford failure, and therefore can't afford innovation. When perfection becomes policy, creativity becomes rebellion. Look at how both nations treat mistakes. In Malaysia, when something fails, people laugh, shrug, and move on. In Singapore, when something fails, there's a committee, a punishment, and a 50-page PDF explaining why it didn't. That's the difference between human progress and political preservation. Malaysia's chaos turned out to be flexibility. Singapore's order turned out to be rigidity. And in the 21st century, where disruption is the new stability, guess who's better prepared? It's not that Malaysia overtook Singapore economically, not yet. It's that Malaysia's people still believe in the future. Singaporeans, meanwhile, are starting to question if the dream was worth the burnout. They have everything, except the ability to imagine more. The irony is poetic. The first world nation became emotionally third world, while the developing one discovered what real development means, the evolution of mindset, not just skyline. So yes, Singapore still wins the trophies, but Malaysia wins the plot twist. In the end, Singapore didn't collapse. It didn't burn, riot, or go bankrupt. It just faded into quiet luxury, quiet sadness, and quiet resignation. It became a country where nothing is wrong, but nothing feels right. A nation so efficient that even emotions need to be submitted through a government portal. And yet, beneath all that order, the cracks are emotional, not economic. Because perfection is the new poverty. When everything works, but no one's truly alive, that's a deeper kind of failure. A poverty of spontaneity, humor, courage, and imperfection. The things that make life unpredictable, and therefore real. Meanwhile, Malaysia, once the punchline of Singaporean pride, found something priceless: texture. Its chaos became creativity, its flaws became flavor, its unpredictability became possibility. Singapore mastered the science of living, Malaysia rediscovered the art of it. And maybe that's the future, not shiny, not perfect, not sterile, but messy, flexible, and full of laughter that doesn't need government permission. So the next time someone says Singapore is better than Malaysia, ask them this. Better at what? At making citizens afraid to dream, at building perfect malls for imperfect souls, at controlling every breath until freedom feels illegal. Singapore may still be richer, but Malaysia somehow feels more alive. Because a nation's true wealth isn't measured in GDP. It's measured in how loudly people can laugh without looking over their shoulder. And right now, Malaysia's laughter is echoing louder than Singapore's silence.